I just had an iPad 7 get dropped off with a shattered screen. Needs a new screen. This model is like the other iPad Airs or the Air 1, the iPad 5 and 6. It is a glass only repair. We are able to put glass only on this model. It's very similar to the iPad Airs and how you open it. The connectors are in the same spot over here on this side, so actually they're over here on this side. I always put it upside down, so here's the home button. When I open it like a reverse book because I'm right-handed and I need to work this side first. There is a flex cable under all these cracks here that you got to be careful. It goes to the home button. If you damage that when you open it and the home button doesn't work, you can put a home button in that's aftermarket that will have home button functions, but it will not have the Touch ID functionality. That is a secure feature from Apple, and only they can calibrate a button to have that feature again once it's damaged. So I've got to be very careful all along this bottom here. So now I've got my heating pad getting up to 75 degrees Celsius, which is plenty hot. I've done them at 60, and I've done them all the way up at 80. 80 degrees Celsius is too hot. Did damage to the LCD when I did that. 60 does the job. You got to leave it on a little bit longer at 60. It's the safe route. Takes longer to heat and get it off. But I have found that 75 is pretty good. It's right in there. It's quicker to heat up. I like to keep my hands on it to check the temperature. The aluminum will get hot all the way around. As soon as it's hot enough, and I know by touch when it is, this needs to be a little bit warmer. And then I start. You always gain access with like an isosimo tool, some sort of thin but strong metal. You gain access just long enough to get your spudger in it. You want to use nylon spudger or plastic. It's much easier to get around without damaging any of the flex cables. Metal can cut right through it, and you won't even know it until you open it up and see what you did. It's much safer to get this in there and use this. Now, screens, have you ever heard of ghosting? Ghosting is a problem when your iPad looks like a ghost is touching and things open and close and keys get typed that you're not even touching, and it might scroll, it'll move around. That's ghosting, and it's a problem that's caused for a few different things, but when you put a brand new screen on it and it does ghosting, it has that problem, it would be because the screen wasn't properly prepared by the repair guy. They don't come with a covering over this copper bar, and yes, it needs to be copper. If it's a silver color, you got a bad screen. It's a low quality. The good ones have this copper bar running all the way around it, and if you could see the inside of this one on here, it's going to have a tape covering over that bar. I don't know why they don't do it, but they don't. So we need to put our own tape over this without getting fingerprints up here on the glass. You don't want fingerprints on the inside for obvious reasons. So when I get it open and I get the home button out, I will do all that, put the home button on here and tape that bar all at the same time, and I will cover that in the video so that you know how to do it. You don't want to seal it up just to discover that it has a ghosting problem. Alright, it feels warm enough, so looking for my suction cup. So I'm going to turn it upside down. Home button is over here. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start on this side. There's no crack on this one little tiny area here. So hopefully that'll help me gain access. And it did. Sometimes the plastic can't do the job and you have to go back and forth. now over here is where I need to be careful because of this home button that I was telling you about. I'm gonna try to get all this up, let it come up at the same time so that I don't tear it. Go. So if you can see, home button flex cable runs right up above all these cracks, comes in, goes underneath the LCD here and attaches to the logic board. So far so good. I don't have any tears in it. So I can turn off my heat, move that out of the way, and start the repair. Alright, we don't disconnect anything from the logic board until the battery is disconnected. To get to the battery though, we do have to take the logic board, or I'm sorry, the LCD, and get it up so you can get underneath it. But don't disconnect it until the battery's disconnected first. So I get this tape covering off of these screws. Just this side of it. The other two are open, out in the open. This is a Phillips head screw tip. I track my screws with magnets, put them aside. LCD lifts this way from the top down. It's in there tight. Alright, so now I can lift it up. So here's the battery connector right here. So I'm going to take this screw out, and it's just on top of the connectors. By lifting that screw out, I can now put one of these plastic razor blades or any sort of plastic in between here. So now that's disconnected. There is no more juice running to this device. So now I can take out these three screws covering the connector for the LCD, so I can move that out of the way. Now, I'm putting these screws in a pattern that's the same as how I took them out. That helps me know where they go. Some of these may be longer than others, and if you put a long screw where a short screw came out, then you're going to have long screw damage, where it digs into the logic board and tears some important lines inside there, and there's only a couple people in the country that can repair that. So, now use your fingernail, not a tool, disconnect it, and set this aside. Now use your fingernails to disconnect the others. This is to the digitizer. And then we've got tape covering the connector for the home button. I like to just set my tape down here to reuse it. Flip the ZIF connector up. Pull it out. And now over here, I'm going to move this out of the way and reuse it later. Pull it up from the adhesive. Now once you're sure all the adhesive is not grabbing anywhere, you can pull this whole thing out. And so now, this is important, but I'm not there yet. I'm going to set it aside and come back to it. Now that I've got that off, dump the glass out. I'm going to clean all the glass out around the edges here. I'm going to use my air to blow it out. Goo Gone. That's what I use. It's good for getting that old adhesive out of there. So just take a paper towel and give yourself a couple of squirts and start working at it. Once it's wet and it's had some time to soak in, that adhesive will come out of there with a scraper. Now, I could have taken these steps out of order and worked on getting this home button off of here and prepping it, but I do need to do some testing by assembling it, booting it up, making sure it works, closing the screen with the LCD in there and a new screen and the home button, so I had to test all that. So all this leftover glue here, if I didn't clean this first and did the other step first, I could close it, not ready to seal it, but that leftover glue could grab hold and basically be a closed device, and I wouldn't be done with the repair. And so then I risk the screen cracking, trying to get it up without cracking it, you know. So that's just too risky, and it's done, you know, it's caused problems before. So the order of how you do it is important, in my opinion. I would clean this first. That way, when you're doing your testing and you're putting glass down, there's nothing to grab hold, and you can easily open it back up and finish your repair. And then when you're ready to seal it, you put your adhesives down. And we'll get there in a little bit. So now I've got the bulk of it out of there. I want to go back over it with this wet rag with my Goo Gone and clean up the residual, the leftover residue. does a really good job. Goo Gone does. There's some others that don't do as good a job and leave a gummy mess and much harder to clean out. I find Goo Gone is pretty close to perfect. Gotta use your fingernails to get in these corners. Alright, so now I want to use a dry paper towel and clean up the Goo Gone. You want it to be nice and dry. New adhesives will not stick if you leave any of the oily Goo Gone on there. Wipes up pretty easy, but you do need your fingernails to get down in that very corner. It's important to be a perfectionist. On iPads especially, there's a lot that can go wrong and a lot of little things that have to be done perfectly or they cause big problems later. Nothing worse than sealing up an iPad and then discovering something that was wrong and you have to reopen it and you risk breaking a brand new screen. And so it's best to learn what order to do it in and do it the same way each time until you get really good at it and it goes smoother each and every time. And people love getting back they give you one that's all shattered and has dents and bent corners and they're worried that it's going to look bad, but when you give them back something that's all nice and looks brand new and they can't even tell a difference whether Apple did it or it was brand new from the store, then they're happy and they tell people and you get more business that way. So it's best to be a perfectionist. We do honor a 90-day warranty if it's ever needed. Every now and then it is, and we honor it. We will replace whatever part we put on. If it had a problem, we would replace it for free for up to 3 months, which is plenty of time. You usually know within hours if there's a bad component that was put onto the device. All right, so I've got it up, but I want to blow it with my air. One last wipe down. Alright, so that's nice and clean. So I can do my testing without a threat of it sticking back down when I put it all on there. So now I'm going to set this side and go to this step where I work to get this off of there. So my tweezers, my Sesamo, and I'm going to heat it up. Alright, so now I want to slide my Sesamo up underneath this home button bracket and separate it from the glass. Get both sides. And then also underneath the home button, try to free it from its glass. You may need your tweezers to get low. Foam in the way. Alright, so now there's still little bits of glass on it, but this I can throw away now. get this glass off. Got little pieces of glass stuck around the home button that I need to get off. If it's going to sit flat in the new screen, can't have any of this little glass fragments. Okay. There's a little bit on this bracket. I want to get that old adhesive off. We're going to put our own new adhesive on there. And if any of that leftover stuff is still there, it won't stick as well. So scrape it all the way down. You can go all the way to the metal if you want to be so sure. Not always necessary, but that'll get a good stick. Now the other side. Be very careful not to damage this cable. It's right up against it. All right. So now, have you ever heard of Tesa tape? T-E-S-A. That is the tape I recommend. It has the best stick and is best for iPads. Want to cut a couple little pieces to go on the inside of this home bracket. All right, so now it's time to prep our new screen. So with this lifted, you got to be careful and not touch that glass. So I'm going to try and set this back down so it still gives me some protection. And it's a good time to put gloves on if you haven't already. It's just better to take a precaution than it is to have to clean. These are the ones I use. Heavy duty, pretty good stuff. Really. All right, this bar along here needs to have some Kapton tape put over it. So don't want to stick it too high so that you can see yellow in the screen. Alright, so now we're not going to have any ghosting, but little piece covers where our home button needs to go down, so I'm going to use an X-Acto knife and trim, being careful not to scratch the black paint because you would see that on the other side. Good. So now we want to let's do a dry fit first. Okay, so when I took the other one up, it came with a little plastic ring. Do you see this little plastic ring right here? The other one came up with it, so I have a choice. I can either tear this one off and keep that one and put it on, or tear that one off. If I leave both of them on there, your button's going to be sitting too deep into the device, and it's not going to feel flush or feel right. So I'm going to pull this one up, leaving this one on there. Since I already cleaned the glass off of it, it still has a little bit of adhesive left over. I'm going to save it just in case. So now it should fit down nice and neat. I'm going to take a look, make sure it looks okay. And that's perfect. So now that we know it fits, it's time to take off the wax paper so that it can stick now. Now, the back of this button has a little clicker. That thing right there has to line up with that little knobby, exactly in line with it, or your button won't work. So, I'm going to use my tweezers to hold the home button bracket while I press the button into place, and then line it up where I believe it needs to go. Too high on one side. So now I got to look down edgewise to see if that knobby is going to be in the right spot. Hear that click? It is clicking. So that's where it needs to go. So I can put this protector back down. Now, before I seal it, I want to super glue this home button bracket to the back of the glass. That adhesive that we put on there, it'll hold for a little while, but once we close it, there's nothing to support this bracket. There's nothing touching it. So there's air underneath it, and if a child or someone is pressing too hard, they will push the home button into the device. One of these sides will come free and it'll sink in. But I'm not going to put on that glue just yet because I need to test. I want to make sure that we didn't damage it. You know, sometimes you can cause a microscopic tear that you don't see with the naked eye. So we do a lot of testing, make sure everything's working. So if you see this battery is still disconnected, we don't want to attach or detach anything if there's still juice going to the device. So there is no power right now. So I'm going to put on the digitizer first. Flip the ZIF connector. Put in the home button flex cable. Now, plug in the LCD. All right, can you see that? All three are connected now. So now it's safe to put juice or power back to it. Switch to my Phillips head and screw that screw back in so it has a good connection. Squeezes it down so that it makes connection with the battery. Carefully put the LCD back. Carefully close the device. Over here, you need to be checking on your flex cables and make sure that they tuck into the device and don't get pinched between the glass and the edge here. So you may have to push it down with your spudger. All right, so now let's test. Hold it into place because I don't have the adhesive on there ready to go yet. It's not time. Low battery. All right, so to test for dead areas, we pick up an app and drag it over the entire surface. If it drops from your finger in the same place over and over again, that will tell you that you have a dead spot. And we don't, so I'm gonna put it back where it goes. I'm gonna double click. Look at that, home button works. Just to be sure, I'll see if it'll wake the device. Okay, so everything seems to be good. So now it's time to glue the home button bracket. Let's go ahead and shut it down properly while I have it open. Remember, disconnect the battery first. A lot of people will forget. A lot of back and forth, a lot of testing, so you got to do it each and every time. If you forget once, you could burn out a back fuse and then have a micro soldering repair to do. And usually, well, if it happened here, it would be covered with my dollar. I would pay for that. I think most men with integrity that have a shop would also cover that cost. There are places that will not, though, just so you know. So now, carefully remove everything. Now we're going to glue this down. I have found Gorilla Glue to be the best for this. I get the gel. I like it a little bit thick so I can manipulate it, move it, use a paper clip. So shake it real well, put a glob down. Alright, and with a paper clip, get a little bit of it. Put it on the edge of the home button bracket. You want to be careful and not to get it all over the, of course, the guide is in the way. I'll be with you one sec.
Sure.
Now I want to set this under a fan. Let that dry. Okay, this iPad 7, I've had the home button super glued and sat in front of a fan. It's now hardened and ready to go. So, let's put back on our rubber gloves. Don't want any fingerprints on the inside of this thing. Make sure all the way around that there aren't any bent corners or edge bent in anywhere. We want to make sure that this glass will fit, and it is looking good. So let's start by plugging in the digitizer. Now it's important that you know you're directly above the connector before you press on it. They're very soft plastic. They're not meant to be undone and redone. They're meant for a single use. And so if you're not lined up perfectly and you press too hard, it will crush the little connector. And if that happens, you have a bad problem. You'll have to remove the old connector from the logic board and solder a new one on under a microscope. Highly skilled job. We don't want that. So now let's do the LCD. Alright, so those three are connected, so now it's safe to connect the battery. Where's my screwdriver? Some smudges. These lint-free rags that you get, I believe they're made of plastic. They will melt if you get them hot, but they do take up smudges better than anything else I've used. You do got to be careful. They can pick up a piece of adhesive and you can spread little swirls of adhesive around, so you got to keep making sure you got a clean spot that you're using. Alright, so now let's test everything. I'm not putting the screws in just yet. I want to make sure everything tests well before I do that. Battery. We're going to do a test to look for dead spots, and there are none. So let's test the home button. That's working. Let's test the volume buttons. They're working. Okay, so it looks good. Let's close it on up. So before I put in the LCD screws, I need to put the plate back in that covers these connectors right here. And I saved my screws in a pattern so that I know where they go. How does it go? Not like that. And then the pattern. You don't want to tighten too tight. Even a quarter turn too far can cause problems. They use really soft metal, so you can strip the screw, or you could strip the threads out of the other end, or you could screw it in too far and it can dig into the logic board, which is a huge disaster. You don't want to do that. There's only a couple of people in the country that can repair that problem. So now time to put the LCD screws back. Now these are all the same size, so if you get one in a different corner from where it came, you're okay. But there's a lot of other screws that won't be okay to do. And with time you'll figure out which ones those are. The Apple products, it's really common to have long and short screws that come out of it, and putting a long one where a short one goes is a bad thing. Now a lot of other models like Samsung and LG's will use all the same size screws, and it's less important to track where each one comes from, but not on Apple products. Now, it's best to pull off the Tessa tape covering, the wax paper that keeps it from sticking when you're not ready, and then the plastic cover on the inside of the glass. I always remove that last, just to prevent any possible fingerprints or smudges on the inside. It's terrible to notice them after you've sealed the device up. You have to reopen it and risk cracking something to clean a smudge. Alright, so now all the tape from the Tessa tape is off. Let's take off this protective cover here and put the screen down. Make sure that the flex cables fold in. And that it presses down all the way. And then we want to let it sit in clamps for just a little while. This isn't required, but I like to know that pressure is being put on the adhesive all the way around. It just helps me to be sure that it's going to be a good seal. We don't want this screen coming up. Early on, when I was learning about iPad repair and learning that some adhesives just aren't as good as others, and joined a repair community online and discovered that the kind I was using was not the best at that time. It was good, considered good, but every now and then you'd have a corner come up or something. You'd have to add more adhesive, and that's always terrible. So I discovered Tessa tape through this group, and ever since then, when I've been using Tessa tape, I've never had a screen come back up. It's just that good. Alright, so that's it. iPad 7 ready to go. So I will contact the iPad owner and let him know it's ready for pickup. Thanks for watching.